Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam. We are actually going to be making the siyum on Hilchos Ishus. We are beginning with Perek Chav Gimel, prakim Chav Gimel, Chav Dalid, Chav Hey. Beginning with Perek Chav Gimel. Perek Chav Gimel speaks about a woman or a man being moichel, a part of the ksuba or a part of the rights, the schusim of the ksuba, details about the dowry and various preconditions or tanoim that either party will make, the ones that are binding and the ones that are not binding. Perek Chav Gimel has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Says the Rambam, Ha'isha shehisnos al baila. When a woman makes a condition with her husband, now this is a condition that's being made from him to her for her benefit. What is he saying? Lavatal schus midvarim shezoichen behanabal. We just concluded speaking about the rights that a husband has from his wife in marriage, and whether she initiated, he is saying he's moichel them. So here's the key chevra. If such a mechila was recorded prior to him actually being zoiche in them, which is prior to the nesuyim, then Eina Sarich Liknois Miyadai. A kinyan is only that's needed when you're giving something, when you're making a transference. Now I know that schusim is not a thing, but you can argue he's already zoich in something. If he wants to give it back to her or relinquish it, then you need to make a kinyan. Prior to the nesuyin, you don't have anything yet, so a kinyan is not even needed. The Ella. Now, 1 second. Ella kol masha kasav law kayam. Anything that he's going to write regarding his foregoing of any of the schusim that we learned above will be valid. However, but if he's writing such a relinquishment or such a mechila after he's already zoiche in it, this is the concept, this is the idea of the beginning of the perek, then sarich liknois miyadai l'mashal chavra. When you have two partners, I want you to know, two shutfim, and one shutif is being moichel anything of the partnership, since he's already your owner in it, there also a kinyan has to be made. Now hold on, we're not done yet. Halacha base. He's na'ima, guys, either again. Remember the first rule, with an arusa, without a kinyan. This stipulation is made with an asuya, with the kinyan. The Rambam doesn't have to repeat it. Now, what are the words? These are the words. He will have no say in regard to his wife's properties. Now, machra v'nasna, if she sold it, as we learned yesterday, right? Various details. Here, if she sells it, michra kayim umatanasa kayamis. However, still, avol oichel peiroiseyem shal kozman shehem b'reshusam. In other words, when a person is mevater and he does not specify bidiyuk what is he moichel on, so we say the minimum possible. Or let me use another wording. Whenever you have a document, the rule is that the yad bal hashtar ala tachtoina. She has a document with the kinyan, without a kinyan, because it was not needed. So look at the words. It's not clear. So with these words, means, like we learned yesterday, she doesn't have the right to sell it. That is his vitur. But if pre-selling it, he still gets to eat. However, if a kinyan was made when it was not needed, and what was the kinyan? Listen, same words, but he did something that was not necessary. What does that prove? Even though the words are not clearer, but since you made a kinyan that you did not need to make, is a raya that you're being mevater on more. If not, if it's only to be mevater that she has the right to sell it, why would you make a kinyan? So that we taich, you go for karka, and indeed the ein loy b'nechosera peiros lo'oila, meaning even pre her selling it, or even if she never sells. He made a kinyan. when they was only engaged. And he says, that's not what I had in mind. I only meant who's going to marry a wife if she doesn't bring anything into the marriage? So the din is ain't shoymamai. Too late. Like we mentioned, even though the words were not more specific, but the kinyan was not necessary, and therefore we touched that it was done to add in his relinquishment. Halacha gimel. Hisna imam, let's say an arusa without a kinyan, shelo yoichal peiros nechosehom. Clear, right? He's saying clearly. See, it's a lesser expression. Not shelo yiloi dinu dvarim benechosehom. He doesn't have peiros. So then, hareze eino oichal peiros saying, okay. Avol moichrin es peiros. But what needs to happen, again, we're saying that he meant the minimum possible. He cannot eat the peiros. But the peiros are sold, and who oichel peiros and he gets to eat the peiros of the karka. And not from peiros saying. Same logic. And then he actually added the words peiros saying. So we're not done, Shuki. So you know what we say? Peiros, he did not relinquish from. Loichin peiros, v'koyim karka, and v'loichin peiros karka zu v'koyim karka shniya, and that's what he had in mind. Guys, we must be speaking about Talmidei Chachamim. V'hoichel peiros elo shein peiros. And the Rambam says the idea is very important. The idea we get. In other words, even though these stipulations is binding it for her benefit, it always means the minimum possible. That's the nakuda. That will be the right semantic formulation. That's the nusach. And then, but guys, we have to remember something that we learned above, right? I think it was in the beginning, Perek Yud Beis, that because of the Torah's usage of the words lechukas mishpat by Yerusha, even though normally the rule is that kol tanai shebamamin kayim, tanoim regarding Yerusha is not kayim. It's like masna masha kosav v'atoira loy b'dinim amanis. So if aval imeisa yirashakoil, that even though the Torah, the Chachamim said a man is Yerusha's wife, even though it's only made the Rabban doesn't, he cannot relinquish that. Yerusha, he cannot relinquish. Clear. Oh, he's the ima shelo yirosheno. Hadeza lo yirosheno. Okay. If he says, I will not inherit her, then Hitaki will not inherit her, but I will oichel peiros bechayeha, because that's all that he meant. He won't yashin her. V'cheinem hisne ima sheyirash mixas nisachel. V'cheinem hisne ima sheyimeisa b'loy banim. Yachzeru nisachim nechasim lebeis aviyam. Then hakol kayam. And okay, I said correct regarding Yerusha. So hold on a second regarding Yerusha. In other words, we limit what he said to mean the minimum possible. And yeah, the Rambam just said, I said it in the wrong order, that if prior to marriage, prior to him having the schus of yashering her, he relinquishes that, it's effective. But when it comes to the specific schus of Yerusha, when will his foregoing of be valid? If he said it before he married her because he wasn't yet, like we began in Halacha Aleph, it's not his yet. There's a big difference between you having something and you giving it away versus you never had it yet. You never had it and you can do it. That is something that you are able to do. But if you are already married, then and the Yerosheno, that's Takapedic Yud Beis Halachates, that called Tanai Sheba Yerusha Bato, even though it's a Tanai Sheba moment, because the Torah says Chukas Mishpat again. But if you're married prior to marriage, you can not allow yourself, you can hold yourself back from getting it from the outset. Halacha Zayin. Hisna ima achad nisuyin, and guys, achad nisuyin, the Rambam doesn't have to say the words with the king, and he already said it. He made it tonight.
There's nothing you can do about not getting the Yerusha.
Correct. That's what we just said. Even though it's Tanai Sheva Mom. Just like when we learned from the beginning.
Kids also, you can't say that your kids won't yash.
That's exactly the point. Exactly the point. Correct. Okay. Correct. That's why the Rambam says in Allah Vav, because when it's me mishpachtoi, the Torah already said how it works. You can't undo the nirush. Right. Allah Zayin, he's the ima acharan isoyin with the king. That what? Now here's din udvarim b'nechaseham, and then he added, like we learned above, v'loy b'peirei perisein adoilam b'chayeh u'b'moisam b'chayeh u'b'moisam. So hareze eino oichel peiros klal. The chiddush of Allah Zayin is that palgin and dibura, because since he's married and the part of his tanai regarding bimoisa is ineffective, one might have argued he put it all together. If one part is ineffective, the whole thing should be ineffective. Whatever can go goes, and whatever the Torah doesn't work. Allah ches. New topic. Habal shohoitzi hoitzos al nichsem eloik. So these are properties that even during the marriage, they belong to her. He only gets to use it while he's married, and he spends money on it. Now, ben shahoitzi ma'at, and he was lucky, v'achal paid us harbe, or shahoitzi harbe, and for whatever reason, it did not produce during that time of the marriage, v'oichal paid us ma'at. Even if only he ate, now this is a minimum share. He ate one gregeres derech kavod. One gregeres means, one fig. Derech kavod means he didn't chop it in the field. At least he had it while he was sitting around a stable. Or if he's not eating it properly, if he's eating it basically Americana, you're eating when you're standing anywhere, it needs to be the minimum of the value of one dinar, and I don't care where. That's a minimum share. What did he receive? A very minimum, a bundle of straw. So at a point, which is when he divorces her, what happens when he divorces her? When he divorces her, she takes her field back. Is there ever a time that the husband can tell his wife, listen here, this was never mine. During the marriage, I had rights that I made very little use of, but I spent a lot of money. Pay me back the money that I invested in your property. If he had any benefit with the minimum share, he can never claim that. Right? The Rambam is saying what he cannot do. He cannot be toiveya her. Why? Guys, what does the Rambam also be alluding to? If Hitake would have eaten nothing and he spent money, then he would have a time. Halacha test. She inherits money, and she inherits ksafim. Now we said that already while they're married, even though in the marriage, it is all in the category of nichsim eloik. Same idea. Here he's giving an example. It's not that she had a property that he needed to make an investment in. Pasha, there was money in another location. Today, make a wire. There were no wires then. You needed to hire trustworthy people to bring it over. So she inherited a pekel of $30,000, and he invested $2,000 to bring it over. Then they get divorced. He invested money, and then they bought karka. If he had no benefit, then he has a taina to her after they get divorced. But here again, how would he benefit from money? She's giving a mashal that the money came, and they bought karka, and he ate that shear that we mentioned above. Either even only one greget is derech kavod, or the value of a dinar afilu shleik derech kavod. So here again we say masho hoitzi hoitzi umasho achal achal. However, in contrast, hoitzi v'lo yachal, he spent money on his wife's property, and he didn't derive that minimum amount, or even if he had it, but it was less than the shear that we mentioned above. So then we deduct it. Now, by the way, sometimes you're going to make a cheshbon and it's not going to be as much as you wanted. Shaman kama hishbiach. Okay, how much is it worth now? V'shayal noisei kama hoitzi. Im hashevach yoiser al hoitza'a. Then he has a taina. Let's say in this case, he invested some money. How much did he take? Yishava benekitas chepetz kama hoitzi and v'noitel ha'hoitza'a. Even though he doesn't have a raya, how much he spent. V'im ha'hoitza'a yisera al hashevach. Eloi min hoitza'a elo kishir hashevach. Now, if he ended up investing a lot of money, why has problem? He invested $10,000. When he divorces her, he brought the value up. He only brought it up to $5,000. Here he can't say, I invested 10, give me back all the 10, because I didn't eat the shear. No, if it's only worth $5,000 more, but he'll get that $5,000 back. Only if he did not eat the shear. Gewaldig. It makes a lot of sense.
Are we talking about metaltalin that he's
Metaltalin or kag doesn't make a difference. So it's anything that's benechsam aloig, for which he has user fruit. Speaking about him having any claim.
some of this metaltalin might not have any pay risk. You know?
But sometimes metaltalin, he won't invest any money. What do you want?
If he brought his wife's, his grandmother's
That's exactly what we're saying.
jewelry,
Yes,
and so he's entitled to reimbursement.
but we have to correct.
He get it.
Correct. Halacha yud, as we keep on saying, if he divorces his wife, Avol, however, in other words, when he initiated the divorce, but Ha'isha Shamar Dal Baila, the woman is the one that initiates the get, and that's something that we'll be learning a lot about today. By the way, both ways. Like, what's the halachic justification for if she's the one? We learned before Moedevis, she's doing something that because of her, the get has to happen. Or another example, it was a rabbinic marriage from the mother. She's a minor. There's no father in the picture. A mother or older brother can marry her off, but it's a marriage which, if she does miyum, she's going to retroactively nullify it. There, afilu achal harbe, even if he benefited a lot, nevertheless, shamalei kama achal upoichasin oisim mashroi litleim in haitzat sheishav v'noitloi. In other words, he's going to get compensation because shaloi hikna lo kadei shetitel v'teitzama atzma. Because when a man is investing anything in the nichsim lug of his wife, it was never done for her then to have I don't want to be married to you, and now I'm taking that away. It was never done all that does. And she does miyum. Royen, kama achal, v'kama hoitzi, v'kama shbiach, and v'shaman loy, here is keminag oris. Sharei b'reshus yarad. What's here? You make a different cheshbon. Here, what you do is that since it's retroactive, that means they were never married. So what's the din of that location? If I go into your property and I work it, and you're paying me like a sharecropper, that will be the amount of money that he's going to get. Halacha yudal. Let's go right. Another topic. Now we're speaking about details about the dowry. Minhagos rabbis yesh banadunya. Yesh mekoym shenohagu sheyichlevu baksuva hanadunya. Remember the sugya we had in Ksuvas. No, it's when we keep on saying that by Nechset Shem Barzel, we're going out to Nechset Shem Barzel. So a man gets married, she's bringing property in, or she's bringing metaltalin in, and they're evaluating it. You're looking at a number in the Ksuva, and as we learned all the details yesterday. So let's say it's a property, they say she brought in $1 million property, and what happens is that if he divorces her, or if he's going to be chayv the Ksuva to her, then he has to give her the value of $1 million. And if the property is only worth $800,000, he's going to owe her this property plus. And the same thing vice versa. If the property is worth double, then he has to give her $1 million from the property. And if she wants to buy the rest, all the details we learned yesterday. You should just know that the number that you are reading in the Ksuba wasn't necessarily the correct number. They would purposefully, some places, write a larger number. Some places they would write a lower number, and you have to know that. So sometimes, in order to make it sound like, wow, look how much dowry she's bringing in, if what she brought in was worth $1 million, they would always add 20%. And if that is the meaning of the makim, so if there's a get, and when you read $1.2 million, you have to know what it really means, or vice versa. Sometimes for ayin hara, they didn't want people, like in Brazil, people are afraid that others should know that they have a few dollars. They're going to be kidnapped. They're going to be killed. So you always minimize. So you have to know that before you can't just read it. So it's like, it says that you brought in $1 million. Now you're high for the Nichset Seimars of $1 million. That's going to be this halach. Sometimes they write it even by adding a third. That's a lot of money. Or adding a fifth. Or adding mechza. Can you imagine? She brings in $1 million and they write $1.5 million. Whatever the Rambam means, it doesn't make a difference halachically if it's melagav or melabar. But there was a standard add-on to make it look like, wow. If the Nadunya was really only worth $1 million, but they wrote, that's the mechza. Why? The Rambam says, be mindful of it. And Pashat, so when she comes to collect, now this is important, you can get married in New York, and you can get divorced over there in another country. And in the other country, no one did it. You have to find out that the makim that the ksuba was written, what was the meaning over there? And the same thing was in the reverse. Because of Ayin Hara. Or because of Pasha, the practical fears. No one should know that person is not wealthy. They would write a 10. She brought in $10 million, but they wrote she brought in $1 million. The guy cannot go and say, it only says $1 million. You know it's a code. $1 million means 1/10 of the real value. Right? Or even more, if she's bringing in Kalim, and they wrote that the Kalim that she brought in was worth 100 zuz, right? Really, what she really brought in was the value of 120. She really brought in, like in the opposite direction, the value of 150. And you only wrote down she brought in the value of 100. It's not a normal. There are some normal places. You're right, the way it is. There's another minute, guys, that in order to make the Nadunya look more, the man would also add money to the Nadunya, but that was not a real gift he was giving to her. It's as if the Nadunya is like a bank account or a thing. So he would equal it. He would, she brought in $1 million, he brings in $1 million. That $1 million was never brought as her Nadunya. He's not going to be chayiv to actually gift it to her. You have to know what the minig was in that place. That either it was a fixed amount because she has to have all these things when she gets married. A equal amount in order for her to appear like, wow, look how much money she brought in. Well, the point of all this is that those additions were never meant in that location that he's gifting her money or gifting her in a dunya. They just wanted to write a larger number. And all of that then has to be deducted if he's going to be chayiv to give her these numbers back if there is a get, or if he predeceases her. Halacha yidbeis. Hanoi system koisev and noisin kamenek hamadina. V'chein yishu paskal lahachnes noisenes kamenek hamadina. And therefore, shtavi likus aksuva magmalo mashu b'ksuva se kamenek hamadina. Ubachol advarim ha'elu v'chayotze behem minig hamadina iker gadol. You have to know what was the minig. V'al piv donim. Let's make sure it's indeed the case, because sometimes you have a big city, but in different neighborhoods, like find out and know that for already the Gemara speaks about this, that when you look at a number in the ksuba, for time immemorial, it didn't always mean that number. It could mean more, it could mean less, and you have to make sure you know what it meant for you then to paskin accordingly. Ish v'isha shoy b'neim shidduchim. We said the word shidduch is not the way people use the word now. Vashatchum shidduchim means that prior to a man giving the ring, there has to be an agreement between him and her that they are getting married. The most accurate shidduchim means what we call today, did you propose? When he proposes her, will you marry me? That's their shidduchim. They made up. Now there are times that while he's proposing, and we don't do this today, many people do this prior or post, but when they're making their agreement, they begin speaking numbers. And he tells her, okay, we're getting 1 second, let's speak marriage, right? What are you bringing in? In other words, they came to a verbal, there was no kinyan made, they came to a verbal agreement. Or when a father is negotiating on behalf of his children. I know that in our world, this normally happens after the proposal. Sometime by the Vart, you'll see this, the night before the Vart, the night after the Vart, the Mechutanim sit down together. That's mamish what they're doing. I know it's more about getting them to the chuppah, but they're all conversations. It's a yeshiva bacher. He tells the father of the kala, listen, you're getting the greatest bacher in the world, but you can't expect him to support your daughter. How much can you help out for the first? However much chutzpah the father of the guy has, and they're having this discussion. They come out and and that's it. So they came to a verbal agreement. And then then Kiddushin was done. So you know what the din is, guys? The act of the Kiddushin is the kinyan for that agreement. You know what we call this now? To a certain degree, the Tanoim, Danny, that we make today in Lubavitch, unlike Rav Moshe, our Tanoim that we make right before by the Kabbalah Spanim, even though it's not about how much money will be given in the marriage, it's about who's going to be helping with what for the wedding night. But that's a binding agreement. we just do it in a way where there can't be a machlokes about it, because in Bayas Lubavitch we do it when you're already there. It means they already came to an understanding. Many times one party is not happy with the understanding because one side has a minhag not to give anything, but if they're already there. So kanu oisan badvarim, those words are binding. And vehein hein hadvarim aniknem ba'amira. So when you see in Chazal, there are words that are binding like a kinyan. You know what? We have something similar, not the same. Here we're saying that these agreements made pre-Kiddushin are binding. Whether even if she's a Gedoyla or a Katana or so when it comes to marrying off a daughter, regardless, when it comes to the father's side making commitments that he will bring in for a son and his future daughter-in-law if it's the first marriage, and therefore it could be because now they're orphans, but the brother was negotiating, or a woman, the mother, lebita for a daughter, or even a father, when it comes to a father's second marriage, even for his daughter, make a king. Now, of course, Chavra, this is a general rule. If a man makes a verbal commitment, I'm not talking about a neder. It's very immorally ethical for you to break your word. We're speaking about al-pidinim of Choshen Mishpat and Adin Torah. Because if I tell you I'm going to give you money, I make a commitment to you in any context, and then I don't give it, and you challenge me, and I'll be moida. I made the commitment, but I'm not doing it. You can take me to a base, then you won't get the money out of me. Not that I'm doing anything ethical. I'm doing something not ethical. But I never made a kinyan. Same thing here also. In other words, we want to know whether it's binding, whether one.
How are you binding in the first case?
First case is because
So you love your first son,
and because Danny, it's connected also because it was done before the Kiddushin. So that there's a couple of steps over here.
if all the circumstances are the same, what does it matter if it's your first kid, your later kid, a first marriage?
Because by all, very good. By all,
there's some sort of intention.
okay, very good. So Mikan and for many other places that even though there's a big question of how does a kinyan work? Is the kinyan a siba or is the kinyan a siman? Let's go that a kinyan is a siman. What makes the kinyan is the gemiras das. How do you know that there was a gemiras das? Because it was externalized with the kinyan. Sometimes you don't need that externalization. Then that answers the question. He makes a commitment for his daughter. That was a commitment that he made because they're getting married. It's another important thing, even though they never said those words. In other words, if there was only Kiddushin, guys, he's not mechuyev if they got to get after the Kiddushin. Therefore, a person makes a commitment to his future son-in-law. And God forbid, umeis goes on her, the mace goes on the son-in-law. The son-in-law passed away. Now, 1 second, guys. After Kiddushin, if the son-in-law didn't have any prior children, she falls to Yibum. And the nafal if ne'achav le'Yibum, yachal ha'av lo'im le'yavam la'achicha yisiroy tzilitin, but o'locha ain't it tzilitin. And that's even if the first one was the Amoritz, and the second guy thinks he's a big Talmud Chacham, and the daughter is even happier. Thank God I got rid of this guy. I'm happy to be married to the new guy. The commitment was not made to the sheni. Halacha tezayin. Another din, person made a commitment to his future son-in-law, and then what happened over here? One second. And what happened is that he did not leave property. If he would leave property, what did we learn? If it's a binding kinyan, then Beis Din will be yoyed l'nachasa. But Beis Din cannot do that. There's nothing for them to go into. So what is he doing, this husband? He's telling his wife, you owe me the money. The money is not owed by the wife. The money is owed by her father. Oy kenois beloy nedunya. He can tell her, listen here, I'm not committing to this. In other words, my father made the commitment. If you know that you can't get hold of him, you have to either marry me without this nedunya or divorce me because there's a collusion already. And she made a commitment and she doesn't have it. So then he has the right to tell her, I will only marry you when you bring in the money. She cannot tell him, marry me or give me a get. He says, no, I want to marry you. I'm not going to give you a get, but you got to come in with your end of the bargain. And she becomes de facto like an aguna. She's stuck with him. Now, the question is, why? How is she different than any other woman that's a moiredes that the husband has to divorce her? Hitaka doesn't give her a ksuba, but he has to divorce her. So the Rambam says, Gavaldik, it's the opposite of the normal moiredes. Here, the husband wants to marry her. I know these words sound funny, so who's stopping you? But he's saying, I want to marry you, but meet your condition. But he's in the mode, I want to marry you, and she doesn't want. That's a regular meredith. A regular meredith, he wants, and she doesn't want. She's rebelling. Avalzu, the husband doesn't want. She wants to be married even without giving the nedunya. So since it's going in the opposite direction, it's the opposite dynamic, don't apply the din of Amayredes. By Amayredes, you give a get, here he doesn't give it.
So just to understand, she's in this limbo, she doesn't have the cash, and he's not releasing her, but he's also not like constantly in the marriage. Because he
wants her. He just wants her with the cash.
The violation is just to sit there and wait.
This is not a good guy, correct? Huh. Yeah. She should borrow the money, get married to him, be a moiredes, and get divorced. Problem is by a moiredes, she's going to lose her nedunya. Don't make commitments to your husband to be that you're bringing money in, and don't get engaged to a guy that is like this to begin with. A minor girl, any commitment made by a minor chavra halachically is gurnished. Because the commitment to her is not binding. Which is a common thing. A woman was married previously, she has daughters. And you're concerned about your daughters. So this woman with a daughter who met a guy who's undertaking that, part of the agreement that they can make is that you will also support my daughter. And they wrote an amount of time. Guys, if you agree to an amount of time, you didn't say, I'm only going to support her if we're married. He didn't write that. She says, for the next 10 years, you're supporting my daughter, even though she's not your daughter. The din is chayiv losin oisa shonim shkeval alatzmai. Period. For who she asked all davos zeh b'shas kedushin, as we learned above, right? That because of simchas nisuyin goyner umakna. Okay. Aval shalei b'shas kedushin. If there was no kinyan, right, and it wasn't b'shas kedushin, achi yiknu meyodei. As we learn in Nilchas Binka Chomemke. Now here's the key. The kinyan has to be binding, either b'shas kedushin without a kinyan, or you made a kinyan. Now, even if she gets divorced, she gets divorced. And not only that, I'll tell you one better. And she marries another man. She's busy. And you know what she tells the new husband, now the third husband or the fourth husband? I have daughters. He doesn't know that one of the previous husbands already committed to support the daughters. You're marrying me, you're going to support my daughter. It's a good business, you understand? Then, now you have two men that are committed to support the daughters. The first husband cannot say, hold on, if we would have been married, you would have been living with me, then I agreed to support her. No, you never said that. All you said was you're going to support her. And you know what? Even in the case where you didn't make a kinyan, doesn't matter. If you're going to makna because of the simchas hanesoyin, that is your commitment. You bring it to the other man's house. Let both husbands get together, the ex-husband, and say, okay, the goal was to be mizan the daughter. We'll do it together. No. Ela echad zana, the echad leis not the main is final halacha. Yes, that's you follow what you said.
And even if she's a meredes, she doesn't lose this promise that he made. She loses other things.
L'chayda not. L'chayda, this is a commitment that a man is making that's outside of the ksuba, the Tanai ksuba. Yeah, very good. Even if she's a meredes. Halacha yudches. Final halacha. Nisais habas b'toich zmanze. The daughter gets married. What's the din, guys? How do we begin all this? That the ksuba, pedicure based. A man has 10 chiyuvim to his wife. So habal chayim mezainisel. And now she has 2 other men that have to give her the dmei mezainis. Ubale ima shneim kolech alneim lois lo dmei mezainis. Now, what happens if mesu elu shepaskol lasan omer? These men, they are no longer here. Im kanu miyadam, if the obligation began with a kinyan or with a shtar, then this becomes like any balchay b'shtar, and the commitment is so binding, even if she's married. But at least if it's a commitment that's binding, but without the kinyan, because it was done b'shas kedushin, then and therefore ve'enoi toirefes. Any terefes, guys, means, just to know the words, remember, it means she's not goiva from the nechasim mishubadim. She will be goiva from the yarsha. She cannot be tighter from the lukuchais. All right, Yidden, moving on. Perek Chav Dalid is going to be speaking about a person who married an islandess, whether he knew she was, whether he did not know that she was, if a woman, God forbid, commits adultery, other activities that a woman will engage in, das Moshe, das Yehudis, for which she forgoes her ksuba, and reasons that halachically justify a divorce. What's very important as an intro, both for Parakim Chav Daled and for, God willing, the final chapter in today's 3 Parakim and the whole series of issues of Perek Chafei, is that whenever you're going to learn Mekach To'us, never think Mekach To'us means that they don't need a get. Very rare. We're not learning about them at all over here. Do you say Mekach To'us to the Madrega, you don't need a get? We're learning in the context of obligations of the Ksuba. Mekach To'us to the context, a get has to be given. Nervous, then she loses the rights of the Ksuba. That's very important to remember that. Perek Chav Dalet has 25 halachas, beginning with halacha Islandess. A man marries an islandess. The word islandess, we learned that Rambam says, remember what these terms mean. Remember in the beginning of Ishus, a barren woman. And importantly, this is a man that did not have children previously, nor does he currently have another wife, which was permitted prior to the Chedem, with whom he's able to fulfill the mitzvah of Pru'uravu. Afapi, if you remember, we learned that before, even if a man has only married 10 years, the Rambam says, here we know she's an islandess. We already determined how you know that. She has all the Samani islandess. She's 35 years old. We know she's not having children. So this is a scenario, guys, he knew she's an islandess. This is a scenario where they're forcing him to divorce her. Just because a man is being told by the Beis Din to divorce her does not mean she loses her ksuba. He's chayv to give her the ksuba. The yesh lo ksuba, ushar tenoy ksuba. Why? Because we're speaking about a man who knew prior to marrying her that she was an islandess. He didn't know that the Torah is going to tell him, you can't be married to her, either marry someone else. Didn't know that. But he knew who she was. The idea that a man can say, why should I be chayv to pay the ksuba? I was tricked. He knew that. He didn't know the din, but he knew her status. So everything that the ksuba binds both ways, chiyuvim 10 to her, schusim from her 4 is going to be binding. Avol, here we begin. If a man marries a woman, that's the key. He did not recognize her condition, and now it turns out that she's an islandess. Or this is another important thing. He married a woman that the Torah says you may not marry. Kedushin is typhus. Or if a person marries the shniyos, la'aroyas, the Rambam counted those 20 scenarios. Bein hikirba, even bein loy hikirba. Interestingly, here, even if he knew, you can argue you knew, when it comes to these women, the din is that we cancel her, we penalize her. Because whenever there's a scenario where if a woman gets married to a man, it doesn't affect the status of her children, which is the case over here. It's not in the edible that the kids will be mamzedim. So then she is definitely involved in trying to get him to marry her. She wants for that to happen. And she knew, like he knew, in this case, we penalize her. There we say, not only are they mechuyev if they get divorced, which is as we learned before, if a man marries a kohen, marries a gerusha, even though the kedushin is typhus, but there's a mitzvah for him to divorce her. Here, ein la iker ksuba, v'loy t'nai mitnai ksuba. You know what they get? Avol toisefes yeshba. That's very important, guys. The toisfes, if a man opted to write a toisfes to the iker, it's called a matana that he gives her bechibas bia. So since he had nesuyin with her and there was the chibas bia, that is binding. However, ve'ela mezoinus va'afilu la'achar moisoi. Wow. Now we forced a couple to separate. Mafrishin b'neihem umafrishin b'neihem ein mitzin min abal peidish achal. You can argue, if you remember above, that since a man is chayiv lifdoisa, the Chachamim linked it. You're chayiv to be paid to her. You get to eat the user fruit. Here, we just said the ksuba is not binding. He's not chayiv lifdoisa, so she can at least kinda. You're not giving me the ikr ksuba. You're not giving me the other things. At least give me that which you ate. Not. This is because I know that he sinned, but she also sinned, and in this case, she's penalized. Halacha gimel. Lama ein la iker, but yesh le toisves. Ha iker utakonas chachamim keloi kadei shaloi tehei kalaba ein nav lo hitzia. And hoyel v'le iker ba. In the case of she never knew she's an island is ein la iker. The point is the chachamim, since the chachamim want for this relationship to be terminated, so why should she get the iker? Aval toisefes, if there is toisefes, shuchai v'atzmi ba. Calls mansha tirtze v'tamid lefanav. In other words, harei the betnai shala. Like we said, he decided to marry her, as did she. And v'harei hiknas loy hana asa. She gave him that chibas bia or dahana. V'harei yermedes. Aval atoyra asra oisa olav umayir chelas. No, it's very difficult in this case. There'll be other cases. There'll be where she even loses the toisefes. In this case, she's not going to lose the Tesefes. I think a chesh with Tesefes. She'ein masel hein hagorman lo lehei asar achar anasuin. She was already asar before. The Rambam is alluding to cases that we're going to learn later. Like Lamashal, if a woman, God forbid, it was zinsa in the case tachat baila, where he's going to be chayiv to divorce her. There, she did something that brought that about. She will even lose the Tesefes, not over here, even though they were asar. But again, the Isra was before. Okay, halacha down.
You only get the Tesefes if the marriage was consummated. Is that right? But
you only get the ksuba of the marriage is constant. Sure, chibas bia. Yes. Now halacha dalid. Now v'lama leicholku b'shniya bein hikirba bein lo hikirba. Elo amru that by the shniya ein lo ikir ksuba b'chol makim. Mipnei shi medivrei soifrim, and therefore they made a chizuk, and divrei Torah don't need a chizuk. Avalim nasa achas mechayav ilavin v'hikirba. That means he knew before. Oy achas mechayav yasei bein hikirba bein hikirba. Here we say yesh lo ksuba shechayavei lavin shehikirba rotza lahachzik ben achasav. In other words, that since he knew that she's forbidden, when he knew that she's forbidden, he, knowing, wants to be mazik his nechasim. So here you have to pay. Chayavei yasei yisuram kal. And in both of these cases, v'yesh l'shteim zoynois only la'achar moisoi. In other words, it makes sense. During the life, the marriage is not kosher. During the life, the marriage is not kosher. But those tanoi ksuba that we learned that after he dies, let's say the almana gets a little bit of the estate, now they're not living in sin. The chayim lafsa va'achla, he's going to be chayiv l'shalem. Gavaldik. Okay. Another din that when we forced a husband to divorce his wife, we also penalize him, guys. It's not only penalizing her. In other words, you know this marriage is forbidden. You married her. During the marriage, you were eating from her user, you were eating from the nechsam aloy. Go pay that back. Halacha. Another thing. Hamima enes, in the case that a woman was married only rabbinically and she de facto, retroactively dissolved her marriage, Such a woman ain't lo ikar ksuba, but let's use the same logic. But she has a teisefes because it's a matana that a man is giving to this woman bechibas bia. There was a consent, there was a bia, he's chayv to give her. But here, ve'ein motzim in abal peidish acham. It's not his fault that she was mama'in. He didn't do a sin over here. Think about it. She retroactively nullified, but you can't demand money from it. Now, ve'im lafsa kishoisa tachtov, ve'achla, ve'achar kach mayana also, ein motzim oisan mizoynes min abal. And by the way, this is the general rule. Whenever there's no ksuba, there's no mezoynes. So he's not going to be chayiv to pay for the money that she borrowed. Now, let's go to a worst case. Misha's in satachlas bailam. I mean, she, during the marriage, committed an act of adultery. And that's why he's chayiv to divorce her. Again, it's not that she doesn't need a get. She needs a get. But here it's even more. Here, ein law, not the ksuba, not the iker, not the toisefes, not any of the tunay ksuba. Because here we say, Shaharei Maseu Gormolo Lehe Osar al Bailon. Allah Zajac. The Ha'ech din Nashum Elu bin Adunya Shalom. What about the Adunya? She brought in an Adunya. So the din is, Kol Isa Shen Adunya Yasa Kayemes, even if she was Mizana, whatever is there, Be'en, Loitela Shalom Bohei Leches, because it's there, it's intact. However, if the Ksuba, the Adunya, is not intact, or she's mechayve yasei bein hikerba bein lehikerba, or she turns out to be an idleness and he did not know that, right? Oy mechayve lavin vehikerba. Here, harei he bin aduyasa kachol hanoshim. Correct. Let's read just to have people of the Chayenu. He's Gavaldik is here in footnote 6. He writes like this: that the rationale for this ruling is, the women that I mentioned in this halacha are all entitled to the ksuba, and as a result, the laws apply. The same laws that apply to other women with regard to the dowries apply to them. Now, why is a shniya different? In regard to a shniya, even though she's not entitled to the ksuba, our sages impose penalties on both him and her, and require them both to suffer a loss. In this context, he loses. He knew he's not allowed to marry her. However, back inside the nichse tzem barzel, chayev ba'achriyusan. The nichse meloik, mashenigna b'yavad avadla, but the einoi chayev l'shalim. Halacha ches. Choisa island is, if she's an island, so I'm chayev elavin. V'lo yikerba, he did not know about it. Now we say, kol ma'shavar enignav oibala, oishenishchak, b'nichse tzem barzel, ein abal chayev l'shalim. Why? And although he accepted responsibility for them, but his whole achrayis, guys, is under a false pretense. He's going to be chayv l'shalom. And ironically, that Rambam points out, turns out that it's mamash hepech mikol anosh. Mipnei she'en shom ishus gemura lo yizacha b'nichse meloik. And therefore, he's held responsible, even though, guys, again, get he has to give. Right. So when a man is machayv to give his wife, let's say the ksus, and we learned that even after next year, he's chayv to give another 50 zuz of ksus, right, the minimum. Those remains, she's not allowed to keep. She'ein moitziin men abal dover memashover enignav be'menichse meloik be'menichse tzem barzel. Ella, she only takes hanim salah. We're going back to nichsa and the yoitza. Halachiyut. Misha is in satachlas bailam, as we said before. Ein lo ksuba. Well, you can relate to sefes. The ein we see in abal davim mamashu ava the mashin igriv nichsa tzem barzel shalom. And no need to say, of course, nichsa maluk that never belonged to him. So he's even less responsible. But the point will be any get that's being opposed upon the couple because of her choice of behaving in a way where halacha will demand for him to divorce her. Ella, and here we're learning these or introducing these concepts. If a woman is called a oiveras al das Moshe, that will be defined in a moment. Or if she's oiveras al das Yehudis, or hayoitza mishum shem ra, we're going to see how do you define that. It doesn't, God forbid, mean the way it sounds. But imagine if two people conspire and they make a tzazab shem ra on a woman. In the case where Al Pi Din, because of the Shem Ra, that's substantiated, he has to divorce her. In that case, in all these cases, then we apply everything we say in Allah Yud. Ein lo ksuba, And as we said in Halacha Yud, both regarding his achrayas post facto for nichtas and barzal and for nichtas meluk. V'cholachas mehem neteles hanimsam nediyasav yoytza. Whatever is there, she takes. But the inabal chayv l'shalom klum loy masha pachas v'loy masha avad. We're not saying about pshia. We never mentioned pshia, but other than that, he'll be exempt. Now, what do you mean by das Moshe? What's the veras al das Yehud? Says that I'm a malach yudalt. Feilin on dvarim she'imas echad mehem avad al das Moshe. Number one is, das Moshe means biblical halachas. Yoitza bashuk usa'ar roisha goli. She goes out in the public with your hair completely uncovered. Two, oy shenideres oy nishbas ve'ena mikayemes. Number three, oy sheshim shamitasa v'hinida. He did not know about that. No, what she's getting him, that's called lifnei even. It's not the Messiah, he didn't know. Oy, other dinim, not going to gay marital relations, so let's put many together. It's interesting that he's specifying that because we learned above that one of the chiyuvim she has for him is to be oifa pas. No, what she's doing, she's making bread for him, but she's not taking off challah. And he didn't know about that. Even if what she gave him is only asur midrabanan, for example, the Rambam is writing it because until in our generation, when the Roividen are going to be living in Israel, if that didn't happen already, then the Rambam says that the Trumas U'Maisos, even in the Holy Land, is only midrabanan. Even if it's only midrabanan, that's called the veras al das Moshe. Now, how halachically do you become aware of it? If she says, I'm giving you treif, we'll see in a moment, you don't always believe her, as we'll see soon. Or if a woman says, I was mezana under you, there's a concept that we say, Shema Nasna Eineo Ba'achid. She wants to marry someone else. But here, we know it because she's saying, I gave it to that coin. Or, no, I had a mara, but I'm good because Pliny had chacham tir lias hakesen. And after he ate, after he had a relation, Shaul Oisei Pliny, he asked that individual. She says, that Rav, look at my mara. And I'll say, now you know that she's not saying the truth. Or another example, guys, it was common that women, while they are in the state of nida, they wore big day nidos. So he didn't know about that. He finds out later that other neighbors saw her wearing those garments. And he knows that then she told her husband, that's called the Isha that's Severes al Das Moshe. And that's the most stringent scenario where, again, he's always chayv to give a get, where she loses all of the rights that we mentioned in Halacha Yud. What's called Das Yehudis? Das Yehudis is the Jewish religion. Das Yehudis refers to, which is something on a lower notch, but still something that's mechayev him to divorce her. It's referring to minek tznius. Number one, not in her home, but in the market, or to the mavoi mefulish. Mavoi mefulish means, we'll see, if she's only in the chatzir, and if she manages to go michatzir l'chatzir without going through the mavoi, it's less problematic. But she already went to the mavoi. It's not public, but it's already many bnei chatzeres use the mavoi, and it's mefulish. That means people go through here. The bnei Ishus Rambam can go through it. V'roisha parua does not mean that her hair is completely uncovered, but it means she doesn't have her head fully covered, even though that her hair is partially covered. She's wearing a kerchief. We're not speaking about what we call today a tichel. The tichlach today fully cover the hair. If a woman wants it to cover, we're speaking about she's wearing some sort of kerchief. It's like wearing a hat, that your hair is partially covered. Not all hats, many hats that don't fully cover the hair. Number two, she was spinning, as we learned. The minik hanoshim was to spin, but she was dressed in a way that very immodest woman dressed. Meaning, the example that he gives, she's wearing some sort of rose on her face, on her forehead, on her cheek, and interestingly. Okay, number three, or she.
The fact that she's spinning. It's not just talking about what she's wearing.
She's spinning, so it attracts attention, and she's dressed in a way that type of dress is only worn by nashim that are perutzos. While she's spinning in the market, She's allowing for her upper arms to be uncovered. Number 4. However you define this. In other words, she's interacting with young men in a frivolous way. Number 5. Or she's toivas tashmish mi baila b'kol ram acher shcheno sel shoymos oisem medabras aliske tashmish. Oi, listen to this. Shoysa mekaleles avi baila b'fnei baila. Mekaleles doesn't mean that she's telling her husband that I think your father is scorning me. I'm being scorned by your in-laws, by your parents. That's not called that. Is that because of her perception of, whether true or not, that she's being wronged by his parents, she's cursing them. And cursing them in front of her husband. That's called a veres al das Yehudis. Now, halacha yud gimel. Ezra tiken shetehei ha'isha chageres basiner tamid b'toich vesa. In the home, guys, people used to wear jalabas, robes. And whenever you read about girding your loins will be the equivalent today of putting on underwear. Girding your loins means that it's not just a loose robe, but it's bound in a way where it's like putting on underwear. And there was a Maisa Shahaya in Yerushalmi without getting into it right now. Mishum tznius. Even in the home, there's a higher level of tznius that Ezra was misaken. Ve'im loichagra. If she did not keep that takana, ein averes al das. Even though you can say das Yehudis is like the Rabbanans, no, he didn't mean that. It's not on that level. Or v'chein im yotza isha parua. Parua means her hair was not fully covered; it was partially covered. She went michatzer l'chatzer b'toich hamavui. She didn't go through the mavui. She went from one backyard to another backyard. It's not even called averes al das Yehudis. It's not modest. That's the limit. Halacha yudal. Now, averes al das. Don't think that a man can go ahead and say, you're Oived, I'm going to divorce you. I've been Shchayev. No. He has to first warn her, and he has to be able to prove that he warned her. And only then will she lose her ksuba. Meaning, if there's no Eidim, the Yoda she averes al das. The Hisraba below Eidim. The Chazra Avra. Even after he warned her, Hutayin, v'oimer Avra achar hasra. She can say, you never warned me. Lo yisrubi imrotza lo haitzi harei zanoise ksuba achar shetishava sheloi avra. He will be chayiv to pay her because it's a monetary thing. The ksuba. She's arguing. You never gave me that warning. Sheim toida she'avra achar asra ein lo klum. The reason why she has to make a shvua is because if she'll be moida, it's not the hasra. This is not dinei soite yet. This is stam. He has to warn her prior. And she has to be moided to that. And if she's not moided, then he has to give her the kshub. Ketzah. Now, next case. Ketzah, what's called a shemira? There is a report. There's a bad report about her. Kagoin. There has to be Eidim that tells Beis Din that she did davar muchur. What the Rambam says, davar muchur b'yosef. Davar muchur b'yosef means that the Rambam will give examples that you don't have Eidim that she was actually mizana, but people saw her doing something that probably there was an act of zunus. Shadvar marim shoyse sham aveda. Afal pisha ain't sham edus beraya edus beruda bezunus keitza. Keep going. Shoyse b'chatzel levada. She was alone in the courtyard. V'ro roichel yoytze, and they saw. Is giving just an example of those French perfume salesmen. Stay away from them. And v'nichnasu miyad b'shasin tziyasei, and people. She was alone. A roichel, no, he's giving a great example because roichelin, they used to go to people's properties. So a guy is going, they went from door to sell merchandise. The moment the roichel left, what did the witnesses see? Umatsu oisoi medes malamita. They saw that she's getting out of her bed, and she's getting dressed. They see her getting dressed when she's getting out of her bed. They find some wet spittle on the canopy right above their bed. Two witnesses saw this man and woman that are leaving Bimakim Afal. They're leaving up a dark place together. Or one is helping the other one out of a pit. Right? Who does that together unless they were together? They see him kissing her on the opening of her cloak, or Bachlal, he sees, I don't know why that's specified. That's not called an act of Zunus, that's called Davar Mechor. Or they see this woman, this wife, with another man that are megapefin zedzed, that are hugging each other, or They see two people going into a secluded property and the door, they lock the door behind them. That's called Davar Mechor B'Yois. Now, what's the din over here? In all of the instances that we mentioned in Halacha Tezvav only, not if she was Bezana, not if he warned her. But here, the din is if he wants,
all the things, Tzuba, Tzuba, tonight.
Correct. That's what we learned. That's what we learned in Halacha Yud. Very good. And in other words, since she was over, you don't need to have asra. That's much worse. The cases that we said above. Doesn't have to warn his wife. I don't want you to kiss another man. Okay. Halacha Tezayin. Unlike a woman who's okay, she's in the market, she's spinning wool. No, he has to warn her. Halacha Tezayin. Hoiveres al das Moshe al das Yehudis. V'chein zu she'asa davar mechor. Ein koifenes abal lo haitzi. Aval lemrotze lo haitzi lo haitzi. Very good. Afal pisha lo haitzi. Ein lo ksuba. Because let's go back to the beginning. The Rambam paskins ksubas midrabanan. Kadei shaloi tehi kalab ein lo haitziya. A woman who's not noig kedas Moshe, kedas Yehudis, or doing the davar mechorim, the Chachamim actually would want for you to divorce her. So there's no reason to have the ksuba over here. And like pidu ela b'nei Yisrael atzruyos. Abel ela prutzes elam takanazu ela tia kalaben of let it be kalaben. Now it's going to get worse. Worse is znus. What halacha yudzayin? Mi shara ishtois yushinsa nebach. A guy sees his wife being mizana. Or now we're getting to murky waters. Someone of your relatives that you really trust them, and you're saying they tell you that they know shezinsa ishtoi. Ben shoya amor ish. You don't have to go into the dinei avis. Or if the one who brought you this news is a isha. It's the moment you saw or you believe someone who's telling you that she was mizana, not das Moshe, not das Yehudis, not davar mechor. Actually, znus. A man cannot be with his woman if she had an act of a biyah. But if there's no Eidim, see, don't confuse dinim ominous, you have to give the ksuba. Verstehst? Notice if you don't have evidence, there's no evidence that this woman committed adultery, you cannot say, I believe so and so. That's not the Eidim. Now, if she's moida, then takes it like so. And therefore, because again, that's the maybe she'll be moida. If he sees her himself. In other words, if he heard it from one other person, he can't demand for her to make an oath. But if he saw her being mizana, then he can demand for her to do an oath. And then if she swears that she was not mizana, he's chayiv to divorce her, and she's going to get her ksub. But if he didn't see himself, he can't even make her swear. Only if there's another din, we're not going to go into it right now. There's something called Gilgul Shvua. If for whatever reason she's anyways chayiv shvua, then he can ask the beis, and since she's swearing anyways, ask her also to swear that she was not mizan. Halacha Yudches. Everything we said in Yud Zayin is either he saw or someone saw who he trusts. What happens if she's telling it to him? She's saying, I did an act of zunus. He's adding b'retzaina because if she's an Ishus Yisrael and she was raped, they can be together. But no, I committed adultery. Ein mashgichen b'dvoreo. Because Shema ein neon masna ba'acher. And I want you to know that after that Rabbeinu Gershon made a takana that a man cannot divorce his wife against her will, the husband is also not believed. To say that I saw my wife giving, we don't believe him. Because maybe he wants to marry someone else, same concept. And since he cannot be married at the same time, so he's trying to get rid of her. But this concept is a do street. Now, Aval ibdok suvasa. But again, it's interestingly, here's the opposite. You understand? He cannot believe her. He's not mechuyev to divorce her. But if he divorces her, she won't get a ksuba. Not the ikar, not the toisvis. The ibda habuloyos shaharei hoidas business. In other words, when it comes to money, hoidas what then kamei edom dami. Now comes the challenge. He knows his wife. Then guys, this is something that tragedies that happen. Yeah, it's not so posh. Okay, but that's what the words of the Rambam. Some couples go to therapy and then she feels safe and she's maida to something. He is also maida to something. But sometimes theoretically you have the concept that if he's mamina, then he's chayiv. Okay.
In this situation, she's going to lose the ksuba.
Regardless, whenever she says, I did something for which halachically she loses those rights monetarily, but it doesn't
have to divorce her, but
no.
They're usher one another.
No, even in the case where they're not usher, that's what the Rambam is saying. They're not usher. If he's not soymech dat olel, halacha is telling a man, and halacha continues to tell a man, even in therapy, it's not so pashut. There's a concept. Not always that the guy says, I know she's saying the truth. Sometimes the halacha will tell him, no, she's not. The ain based in koifen is ish lagaras es shita. The ain based in koifen shuki yeso ish lagaras es shite bedavim bedvarim elu. You know when Beis Din is going to be koifa? Ache yovayu shnei edim v'yo idu shezimsa ish lagayis b'fneim l'retzoyno. Achar kach koifen oisin lohaitzi. Then if you don't have to not edim saw the davar mechur. That's called the shem ra. No, they actually saw the act of zunus. Now, halacha yutes. Ha'isha shezimsa tachnas baila b'shgaga. I want to tell you, shgaga means that what happened with Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. The two couples are living in the same apartment. That's the case of Bishgaga. A man thought he's having a relation with his wife, and he did not know that she's the other guy's wife. And both ways, the woman, thought her husband is there, and it was another man. That's the meaning of Shgaga. Or, God forbid, it was an act of rape. So the din is, unless she's an Ishus Kohen, Harezu Muteres Labaila, Shenemar, when it says in the parsha of the Soit of he loinus pasa, which implies Hanis Pasa, which means rape, then Muteres. And it doesn't make a difference whether this man was a Yisrael or a non-Yid. Another din. Even if after the Ma'anes began his act of oinus, she then consented, that during the act itself, she was already she was willing, to the point that people chopped them, and people saw a guy raping her, and they want to take him off, and she says, no, let him. And she says, look at the words of Chazal. She says, not even I would pay him to be with me. I want this so much. I would have paid him. Doesn't matter. She's saying this only because the act began. This Yetzer Hara is so strong that once it begins, at this point on, it's not called Beratzim. That's the point of Arois, to make these harchakas, because that's when you can stop it. Once it goes after a certain point, it's unstoppable. Halacha Chav. Noshim Shugan v'oisel another than if a woman was, God forbid, kidnapped, the Chazal say she has Harei and Kishvuyos, which have a din of Anusais. So it's the Chazaka is that if a woman is kidnapped, they were molested. And therefore, since it's Ba'ainas, Mutaris Labaleim. But if the kidnappers let them go, and they went on their own, they kept on going with the listim, they decided it's better with this bandit than with my husband, the bandit. In the moment they stay unwillingly, even though we don't know if they had the act of if they had a sexual relation, we say that if a woman is in the hands of her captor, he's going to be ma'anaser, and if she stayed there willingly, now she becomes a suras l'baleim. V'din hashegeges v'din hananesas echatu. Even though the hiloin espasa means rape, because shashgagat sad oines yeshba. Halacha chafal b'med v'ram amurim v'shoya b'ayla Yisrael. That is where we say that if she didn't have that act with her consent, she's mutaris l'bayla. But if she's a wife of a kohen, even though it was a mamash gaga or an oinus, asura l'bayla, shaharei halachically she becomes a zoyna mikol makayim. The way the Torah defines the word zoyna, and v'uaser b'zoyna kamay she's bar b'lachas asura b'yah. Halacha beis. The echad eishis Yisrael eishis kohen shenenso. If they are raped, whether he could stay with her, whether the eishis kohen cannot stay with her, tsuvasa. Kayemes. The Iker and the Tosefes, Veloy Hivsida Klum. And therefore, the Koifen is a Koin Lik Laksuba Ulagarsham. Halacha Chavdal, Chav Gimel, I'm sorry, Eishas Koin. Sho'amra Labaila Nanasti. I was raped. Oi, Shagisi Vinabalti La'achet. Here again, Einoi Choishes Lidvarel, same logic. Shema Einel Nasna Ba'achet. However, but if in his heart he believes her, then Yoitzi, he thinks Subam. Now we're learning what we call Masechta Soit. Halacha Chav Dalet. Cho'omer le'ishtei b'fnei shnayim. Alti study in Poloni. I don't want you to seclude yourself with a specific individual. And yet, after that, kino. And they were together. Kadei tuma, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes. All the shiurim harezu asura al baila ache yashkena mehamorim. As we will learn more details in Hilchasoita. Now we're learning it here because we're speaking about ksubas. The im meis koydem sheyashkena. Then ein lo ksuba. Afal pi shalei matzu davar mechayer. Because ein lo chadavar mechayer yosem is the end. What did we learn? We learned halacha yud. Very good. And therefore, final halacha chafei. If you remember, I think it's that's Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda that the kino does not have to be done before Eidim. So he warned her, and he tells her, "Al tistri imploini." And he sees that she was secluded, and so says the Rambam Harezu Asura all of this man hazeh she'ein sham meisoito. No words yesh lachus to that das. V'chayev lo hoitzi, but he thinks suba. In other words, he's not neman to make her lose her ksuba. There's no edim. He can't do it al pi atzmai. Ve'im hoidos shenistra acha she'isra boy. Even though it's das yachad and teitzi v'lo ksuba. Ulafikach. And only then can she take her ksuba. This is the final chapter. We're going to be learning other reasons that will halachically justify the termination of a marriage, both from his side and from her side, as we'll see. Perek Chafei has 13 halachas. It's a relatively short perek, beginning with halachal. Hanoise Ishus tam. He did not make any pre-statements that I'm only marrying you al tanai. No. But there are certain accepted norms. The nimsu alei nedarim. Guys, we're speaking about nedarim, as we'll see, that affect the type of marriage he'll have. Even though he didn't say, I'm only being mekadeshu almanas, you don't have nedarim. You don't have to say that. They discover that she's a woman that made vows. Then Tate say, beloik suba loy ikir beloik toisefes. Wow. Because she should have noted there are certain things that you have to notify before you get married. What type of vows are we talking about? No, if she made a vow never to eat meat, if she made a vow not to drink wine, if she made a vow not to adorn herself the way normal women adorn themselves, the big day tzivaynim. And if not, mekachtos. And guys, again, not mekachtos, like we said in the previous chapter, that he doesn't have to give her a get. He has to give her a get. Mekachtos, that he doesn't have to give her the ksub. She's doing something that he says, had I known this, I never would have married her. So that's Ha'isha Hanideres for those Nadar. Halacha Beis, similar when it comes to physical blemishes.
You didn't know about it.
Of course, if you know about it, then it's chayv. I'm a vegetarian. I would even argue, theoretically, that the Rambam wouldn't say this now, because now we're living in a world that it's not uncommon for people to be vegetarians. Speaking about a time that if you're not going to eat meat, I'm a chayv to feed my wife. What am I going to give her? It changed everything. Today, I think it doesn't change. I don't care what my wife eats. It doesn't change anything. And all the types of foods are available. Maybe not with wine. Okay, leave it open. Okay. Halacha beis. V'chen hakoines ishus tam v'nimtzo bo mum mimumei nashum shekvar beyarnu in Perek Zayin, right? All of the ones that pasal hakoyin doing the avodah mezbeach olamayla, and the additional ones that the Rambam wrote. So she has such a blemish. And v'lo yoda habal b'mum zeh. It's not that he heard and he agreed. He didn't know that. Harezu teitze v'lo ksuva. Lo yikir v'lo teisefes. Again, he has to give a get. Ketzad, for example. Now, mumen is interesting. How do you know whether there's a mumen or not? So the bathhouses were public bathhouses. So the Rambam is going to go a couple of words over here. Whenever there's a public bathhouse, other than in certain exceptions, the halach yelech was, a man is getting married, he would ask his sister, his mother, if it's a relative of his, make sure that there's no blemishes on this woman. That's how you would find out. If there was no way, In other words, if he didn't do his due diligence, he can never get out of the marriage. It's speaking about a scenario where he could not have known. That's going to be no. And he has relatives. He can never say lo yadata b'mumen elu. Even if it's a woman in a place that's normally covered. And he wants to finagle out of the ksuba. However, why are you laughing, Govi?
From walking around. Rabbi getting married, walking around, asking his cousin, where did you see? Sending his sister, please go over to the bathhouse.
Okay, I never thought of it that way, but that was the way it worked. I think no people don't speak about this in public to the chavedim, but that's the way it would work. But if there's no bathhouse, or if there's a bathhouse but he doesn't have relatives, then another thing we'll see soon, guys. He can only have this taina right after he gets married. He cannot go a couple of years later and say, hey, 1 second. We will see even a few days later. We'll see, yeah, there's a window for this. Another thing. If a woman is epileptic, but it consistently means when a person, God forbid, has this machla, but it happens without a seder, it's going to happen in public. And if it never happened in public, it means you became epileptic after you got married. It's your bad mazel. Like if she gets a mum after marriage, it's too late. It's all about mekach tos. Here, a woman who only gets these fits at a known interval, such a woman can always cover it up because she knows I only get the seizure at every 12 p.m. and she'll never go out in public. So it's shayich that no one will know about. That's why it's like a mum shebasais. Aval mum shebegoloi. Any mum that is you can see, he can never say, if I would have known, I would have married her. You knew. Even if it's he never met her before he got married. You have to see your wife before you do kedushin. You saw her 2 minutes before the chuppah. But other people would have seen. And v'cheskos and then the spites. The Rambam adds that Rambam lived in Muslim countries. Rambam wants to make a point that there are certain minhagim by the Muslims that they were so covered that even if there's a shuk, you would never see them. They go with the burkas. And also everyone knows everyone. Like in the Western countries, where this level of covering up did not exist. But in places where women never go out at all. And if they go out, they only go out in the evening. And by the way, this can be even another city. And then Tate say Miss Nakra, even when she goes out completely veiled. No one sees them. And therefore, now her kroi voice will never tell him. His kroivim will tell him. And even there, in that city, even in the city, even if they don't go with the faces uncovered, but he has a female relative and there's a merchatz in the city, well, you have to be careful. Still, because everyone can see her when she's aruma in the merchatz. But the Rambam says, add something. But some people are so covered up that even when they are in the bathhouse, they'll never be covered even in front of other women. Or a maiden only bathes at night when it's dark in the bathhouse. Or in the bathhouse, there are little side rooms. No one bathed in the public. That's the way it was. And no one can see her, then he can have a taina. The Rambam says this is all common sense. This is not the Gezeres. So use common sense and find out if it's common sense. When he says, I never knew she had that blemish, shayach or not shayach? That the reason why we say he cannot make a taina because he would have known from his relatives. The other go'inim say it doesn't mean only his karoivim. It means also his friends, which means even if you live in a city and you don't have a relative, but if you have this bathhouse, then you know what? Your friend's wife would check for you, right? Because every person has friends. And before you're going to marry a woman, you would ask your friend's wife, or you would ask your friend, ask your wife to be boidik, ask your sister to be boidik. And therefore the chazak is you knew and you didn't bother you before you got married. You can never say mekachtos. But v'lo yero lidin said that Rambam says, oh, Dovi just walked out. That's not. I doesn't accept that. No one speaks about this in public. You don't even speak about this to your friends. You're not comfortable to tell. The only person you would be comfortable to say, do me a favor, take a look at her in the bathhouse is only your relative. She'ein kol adam, not every person has the comfortability to be moitzi mashu b'libim edvarim elu lakoil. He'll only be comfortable with his relatives. And therefore, if you live in a city where you don't have karayvim, you could taina mekachtos. Halacha daled. Now, Kate said he taina some woman. Let's go into details. He can only claim that she had the moon prior to her getting engaged to him. She should have let him know. If she got this blemish after the Eidus Anan, this concept of nistabcha sodeo, it's his bad masses. He cannot taina mekachtos. For example, how would you know for sure that she had this prior to getting engaged? She has 6 fingers. Then al ha'av lo haviraya sheyada b'habal v'ratza. Oy shechaskos sheyada, like we learned above. And if he doesn't bring a raya, then he has to give a get, but he can make that claim because it's vadai prior to the engagement. But if she has a blemish that at least could be, it came about after they were engaged. If these were discovered after Nisuyin, then he has to, the onus of proof is on the husband, and therefore his claim is mekach ta'os, which is why he doesn't want to give any of the ksuba. If they discover this on her in between, right after the engagement, but she's in her father's house, then we say if the husband brings a raya that she had it prior, or she admits to it, and now the heavy avraya of the shasek ben aspias, but I know that you knew. A man gets married and he's a couple of days with her. After a couple of days, he wakes up. I never saw this. Even if this blemish was inside the folds of a woman's skin, that means that you don't see it easily, or they were on the sole of her foot. You're kidding? When she's standing, you can't see it. They don't believe it. Chazaka, she'ein adam shoyse bekois ela imkein boitkoi yafa yafa. Chazal speak b'lashon Nakiya, and that's what the Torah says. And therefore, v'cheskase sheyada v'ratz. Halacha zayin. Hanoi say isha, and v'nim say she'ein lo v'esas kavua l'nidasa, which is very common nowadays, which was not that common in those days. Not having a v'esas kavua doesn't mean that he cannot have bia with her, but it means that during the times in which there is no v'esas kavua, prior and post the relation, she has to make a bedika. Koidem and acher, as he has to look at the towel that he dried himself with to constantly check whether there's not dam. No man can taina. Had I known this, I wouldn't have married her. As long as, even though you have to do these steps, but you can be with your wife, right? Ella, even it's another thing. In those days, a woman would have what we call hergish. So if a woman has hergish, at least there's a warning. This is a woman that could become a nida at any point. And therefore, a man cannot have a relation with her ad ella b'shnei idim. You have to have 2 bedikas. The bedika koidem bedika al-acher. That's a sign of the fact that the man will have to check on the aid after post facto to make sure there's no blood on it, because maybe the tashmish brought about her becoming a nida. As well in so the din is even though you can argue, that's a mum gadol, but it's not enough for you to divorce your wife without giving her a ksuba. Lo yifsi the klum. Because you can have bia with her. Because and however, if a woman gets married to a man, here we go, chevre, that's the first 3 be'ilois. And if they never had a bia that didn't cause bleeding, the first time they had a relation, and by the way, this halacha has to be done today. Even if a woman has a veskavua, first 3 times a couple is together, you have to be boidik lifnei v'la acher to make a chazaka that she's not bleeding machmas tashmish. If they saw it once, total of 3 times, one after the other, not one time yeah, one time not. And that's called a woman that has a chazaka that she sees down machmas tashmish that he has to divorce her. And therefore, it takes it like subam. Because that's why you tell today Chasanim teachers that when you do these 3 bedikas, if there's nam after once, right away find out, ask her of what to do, or go to a doctor. Definitely don't do it 3 times, because then you'll get into a whole issue. Now there's another din. The other din is that you never know what is bringing this about. It's also possible that this is something that she can heal later. Now you got a real problem, because when a man who's chayiv to divorce his wife halachically, if she sees blood, machmas tashmish, if from the first time, not that sometime in the marriage it began to happen, from the beginning she always saw da machmas tashmish 3 times. Here there's a fear, which is he gave her a get, but he only gave her a get because the Torah forced him, because she's ra'asa da machmas tashmish. Let's say she'll marry another man, and with the other man she won't have this dam. Aside of the fact that we say that maybe it is his member that's causing it, but we can say that she got healed. And then he can have a legitimate taina that I only gave her a get, even though I didn't say it, only because I thought I cannot have a relation. Now that I know I can't have a relation, I never would have given her a get. That's going to put a question mark. Yes. We say this in our case. You're kidding a guy. Imagine the tragedy. You get married, you love your wife, you just got married to her. And you're being forced to give a get because of something, and you discover later that it wasn't a legit reason. So not only do they force him to give a get, they notify him, and you guys can never get remarried. He never has this in his mind. They can never get remarried. There wasn't a real gemidus das, and you're gonna affect the safek mamzerus. However, you don't say, like by the black widow, right? That since this husband made her bleed, she cannot get married. No. She can get married to another man. As we're going to learn in Hilchas Nida, like we just mentioned, because it's possible that the way God made his male organ, that is what's provoking her to bleed. Machmas tashmish, another man will not cause her to bleed. Halacha test. All of the above, this din of ra'asana machmas tashmish, but let's say she gets married, and they had a bia 1 time even, and then she gets ill, and he can't have tashmish with her. Then it's tap chasadeu. Now, guys, I want to make it clear: if a man is not allowed to have a beila with his wife, he'll have to divorce her generally, but he'll have to give her a ksuba. Whenever a couple is not allowed to be together, the general rule is he has to give her a get. But we eat him ksuba kula. However, like we learned about. Woman any blemish that comes about. And by the way, this is even after the Erusin. Afilu nasas mukashchin. Here, imrotza yekayim. But if imrotza lo haitzi, I'm sorry, you give the ksuba. This kind of mekachtos is if it was with her before the Erusin. Now we're going to focus in the opposite direction. It's very similar. Halacha Yudalef. Ha'isha shenol the boy. Ha'ish shenol the woman acher shenasa. Acher shenasa. Like his hand was cut off, his leg was cut off. God forbid, he became blind, and the wife doesn't want to stay with him. Ein koifin oisoi lo hoitzi v'liteng ksuba. Elim rotzasa teishev. She has the din. Listen, any wife can say, I don't want to be married. But then that's called a din of a miredas, and she loses a ksuba. No, these are not legitimate reasons, but let's learn about legitimate reasons. If a man, not that she knew that prior to marriage, before she got engaged, if he had bad breath, she knew that. But if this developed afterwards, she can, and she can't live with him. She doesn't want to live with this. Or a bad breath coming out of his nose. Or he decided to get involved in a profession that gives him a bad odor. Bad odors, that's interesting. All about odor. Or he became a copper miner. or he became a tanner. These are professions that have a terrible bad odor. Now you are in it, you become habituated. But people around you need to know that people that were ma'abed oiris had their own minyan. They were not allowed to walk into a shul. They stunk. Then they force him to divorce and to give a ksuba. Now, this is not a halachic thing. If she wants, she can stay with her husband. But the point is that this is a taina that a woman says, I cannot now. The husband says, you knew. No, I didn't know. When you got engaged to me, you didn't have the bad breath. Now I can't be. What about Listerine? I don't know. Allah yud beis. Here, if the problem is a mukashchin, here, even if she's saying, I want to be with him, they don't listen to her. You know why, guys? Because if a person is a mukashchin, then having tashmish will destroy his male organ. In other words, they can't be together. She's going to hurt him, not willingly.
He has a situation that doesn't enable them to be with each other, they have to get divorced.
Then they have to get divorced and he has to give the ksubas from him. In other words, if a guy in this type of tzaras, we're not speaking about the biblical tzaras from Pashas Tazriyah, etc. We're speaking about what we call leprosy. Now, if she says, I want to be with him, we're not allowed to be together, I'm going to set up our life in a way that halachically we can be together. Be together means we can have yichud. I'll never have yichud with him. Because if she consents to it, then Shemillah. Final halacha of the holy Ishus. Final halacha of Perek Chafei, halacha Yud Gimel, Mishaya Baila Bal Reach Hape, Reach Choitem, Oy Malakit Sois Kalovim, the Chayotze Behen. He was a man that if she would have wanted, she goes to Beis Din and she tells the Beis Din, I don't want to be married with this guy. I can't. And Beis Din would force him to give a get and give the ksuba, but she agreed to be with him. And now this husband dies. And a case of she falls to Yibum. And you know what? The brother stinks like his brother. They're the same. So you can't tell the woman, listen, you agreed willingly to stay with the Reuven. Now you got to do a Yibum with Shimon. No, and therefore the Yachlites, and he must give the, by the way, the Ksuba comes from the estate of the deceased brother. Chavra, Mazel Tov for finishing Hilchas Ishus. We finished actually relatively on time, just 2 minutes late. And Be'ezras Hashem tomorrow, we're going to learn